Welcome to the Reality Lab lecture. Excited to have Jessica here today. Jessica has a company in film production and lots of exciting tools and experiences. Because before that, been at Google and directed and created one of the first, or maybe one of the first VR films ever. I was part of the Jump camera team in Google. Jump camera, for the ones who don't know, it's one of the first VR cameras out there. So I guess you started your career. She just told me that, but she started her film career by making popcorn in movie theaters.
We were supposed to keep that between us. That wasn't supposed to be part of the intro. Yeah, I know. I'm really good at it, though. I'm very good popcorn maker. Except this VR thing doesn't work out.
But 2 years ago, she was on MIT's TR35 list, which is a list of worldwide top innovators under the age 35.
Because of the popcorn thing. Yeah.
So super excited to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Thank you. Thank you for, that's a heck of an intro. Now I'm just hungry for popcorn, and we're just over at the lounge. What do you call it? It's called the Faculty Club, and they have popcorn there that you should not eat. And then I started going off on a tangent about how I was the best popcorn maker, and anyway. They do need me. They need me. Gosh. Well, it's really great being here. Thank you for having me. Steve and I actually worked at Google for quite some time. I actually got my start in the immersive space here in Seattle because I was actually reached out to by a group of engineers led by Steve to check out a rig that they had been building, and they weren't sure what to do with it. And I actually wasn't sure what to do with it either. But so Seattle's been quite the home where lots has happened here, and so it's really great to be back. I'm not an engineer by trade, although I almost became one. I come from the traditional filmmaking world. I went to NYU as a filmmaker. I studied film, and then I ran across the street to the Courant Institute of Mathematical Sciences because I couldn't stay away from nerddom. And at the time, you know, ITP wasn't a big thing yet, so like it was really difficult to meld both sides of that coin. So I would go there, and I think it was when I started learning Perl that I was like, oh, hell nah, and then I left. And then I started thinking about, what I ended up actually doing was thinking more about the way that computers and technology affect society and how the internet was actually affecting culture, and I was more interested in kind of behavioral and user behavior and how that was shifting. And I ended up going to work for Apple, which was more tech, and then I started working at a small production company, which was editing, and then I worked at Google, which was somehow in the middle of those two things, as their first filmmaker that worked there, and they didn't know what that meant, and I didn't know what that meant, but we tried. And so worked on a bunch of marketing and advertising campaigns for a lot of the new stuff they were working on, including glass, which was fun, because we're all wearing it now. Yeah. So, but also thinking about the future and how like augmented, having a contextual layer augmenting the world is actually quite important, and thinking about how that would actually relate to the way that we use technology now. And then when VR happened and when Jump happened, I was tasked as a creative that was interested in tech and interested in the way users evolved with tech to think about what we could do with it. It's the question of why, which we don't ask that question enough, I don't think, right? We kind of just make stuff and we say, yeah, it's cool, and in our silos we think it's cool because we like what we make, and we like seeing our friends make good stuff. But outside in that big old world, there are a lot of people who don't understand what this stuff is, they don't know why it matters, and I think it's up to us, whether or not you're creative or more tech-oriented, to test that, to actually think deeply about how this stuff affects culture, how this stuff can be adopted on a mass scale. Because if you can't answer that, then there's no why. There's no reason to be doing this. It's fun, you could do it, but don't expect it to ever work beyond the scope of a university or a tech company, to be frank. So my abstract title is always just, it's kind of like a wordy thing, but the point of it really is how I really do believe that creative iteration within the development of new technology is not only important, but it's crucial. If you don't have that, you don't know the why. You don't answer the why ever. You just make something that's cool to you, but you don't understand how a user may actually use it, why it might be important to a user in her everyday life. So it's important to know that so you can actually think about its eventual adoption into the world in a natural way, not a way that's forced. So I'm going to go through 3 different technologies that I helped develop in this way and bring out through iterative creative process. The first is JUMP, which is a 360-degree stereoscopic ecosystem for live-action VR content that was created and developed at Google. The second is Bose AR. It's an audio-only augmented reality technology developed by Bose, which allows users to experience spatial and immersive audio. And the third will be something called Inception, which is a convolutional network. Now, this is a little bit more on the fringe level. How many of you know DeepDream? So DeepDream came from that. Inception was basically what they tried to do was the enhance thing, you know, like in all the TV shows, we're like enhance, and suddenly the little tiny blurry thing becomes a very clear, crisp killer. You're like, oh, that guy. So Google was like, maybe we can do that. So they tried it, and then one of the lead engineers on it actually reversed it, I think for kicks, I don't really know. And as he reversed it, the system began to actually dream on top of the image. So what it did was, at a pixel scale, actually start to imagine what that pixel might represent. What you end up getting are very interesting images, which represent absolutely nothing except for maybe halves of dogs and steampunk aesthetics and bananas and so on. We'll see some of that shortly. Warning you ahead of time. So, but a lot of it had to do with how they actually brought DeepDream into the world and how I was able to sort of work with them to figure out, you know, what are different things we could put together to help bring DeepDream into a different medium. And is that interesting or not? So I want to also look at how these 3 impact assessment of the tech and the resulting output. Like how do these technologies actually affect particular things? The first is, you know, how does this technology affect current pipelines? The second is an assessment of the potential cultural impact these technologies might have. And the third is assessing the potential ways of garnering interest at scale. Not just for us to geek out about, but how this stuff actually relates to the people who exist out there in the world. And you know, why should the public embrace this emergent technology with any amount of enthusiasm? And can we see and predict the potential embrace that could occur? So starting with Google Jump, you know, being kind of, I guess, the cinematic eye for the company for 5 years, I've seen a lot, and I've worked with a lot of different engineers and a lot of tech. Some were more well-baked than others. And as I was doing this, you know, one of the more unfortunate parts of the way things were running at the time was that the creatives worked over here and the engineers worked over here, and that's just how it worked. And then you had a marketing manager or a producer in the middle. They sort of decided what got what and who talked to whom, and that was it. And one day I was sitting at my desk. I actually remember I was finishing, there was a project about Google was getting renovated, and I was working on a film about that. And as I was sitting there, I got an email from someone from the cardboard team, which I had heard about sort of in circles. And this person asked me, you know, we're developing a stereoscopic VR rig. You know, have you thought about creating immersive content? And I read this email and I thought it was so weird because engineers don't reach out to creatives. Like, that's not how it works. So for a second, the system kind of broke me down and I was like, I can't answer this. I'm gonna get in trouble. They actually sent this to me by mistake. This person's crazy. So I just like ignored it. And then 2 days later, I got another email saying, hey, look, if you don't want to do it, that's fine, but at least let us know because we'd really like to work with you. I'm like, okay, sure. And I finally answered and just blindly left. Like, I don't even remember what I told my manager. I was like, there's some engineers in Seattle that need to see me and need to go see them. He's like, I don't know what this is. I'm like, me neither. So I go and kind of winged it. You know, I visited Mountain View first to see some demos, and then I visited here. I visited Seattle in the offices, and I was met with this. And half of me was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And the other half of me was like, that's pretty. And I actually think I wrote that 5 at one point. I had to label them because it was really tough to know. So I looked at the engineers and I said, well, what do you want me to do with this? And they said, well, we were hoping you would tell us. So thus began a very beautiful, wonderful friendship. This was, you know, they showed me a few things. It's actually, I think there was a flowering tree outside the University of Washington that they showed me, but this was the stitch that did it. this is the group of engineers that were working on the camera. And I've been trying to film engineers my whole career, practically. And you know, they can be nervous, and they can be like, they're kind of like, I have to read the things that you told me to say. But this is the first time where I actually was in the midst of these great folks, and I totally got it. I got why what they were doing was important to them. They were just hanging out, having a good time, throwing things around. And I knew immediately when I saw this that I had to help. That was the selling point. I was like, that's it. Whatever this is, I don't know what it is, but whatever this is, I'm here for you. Let's figure this out. So this is, you know, as you begin these things, you know, there should be like, someday there'll be a hashtag called like my first stitch or something, but this was the first couple of stitches I actually recorded here in Seattle. And we worked side by side, both the engineering team and myself worked together. Yes, that guy indeed has nunchucks, and he is using them. And we practically, I mean, we just put it through its paces. And you know, there was artifacts and so on at the time, but, and I think Rob got really upset because the ball almost hit the camera, so he was kind of freaking out and took our toy away. But we learned a lot. Like, we made all the mistakes. Like, we just worked together. We had no idea what we were doing, but we just decided together we would walk around and just try to figure out what to do with it. This led to a very long, I wouldn't say a long trip. It was actually shorter than it should have been, but my producer Nick and I basically went to Japan, Puerto Rico, California in case the camera broke, and it did, and Iceland, just to throw it at different things to see what would happen. Again, we didn't really know. You know, the camera liked certain things more than, or the rig liked certain things more than others. We filmed at Arecibo, which was really great. So under the massive dish at Arecibo, and on top of it too, I broke one of the rigs there because it's curved, and then when you move the actual platform, which we got to, it kind of toppled the thing over. It's a thing. But it loved Iceland. It's a very emo rig. It loved Iceland because it was cold and because there were no other people around to disrupt the signal that was connecting all the cameras together. These are unsynced GoPros. So and so if you press a button, you don't really know if it's going to work. So it was kind of like that. Now, even given that, you might be thinking, well, you got to go around the world, you got to film all sorts of stuff. That was such a romantic, wonderful trip. I get that a lot. Oh, hell nah, it's not. This is basically all the time. Like, I mean, this is SD cards for each of the cameras. We had backups for each of these. We had hard drives for each of that, backups of those hard drives. Each of those individual GoPros had to actually be charged. And we completely forgot the fact that, you know, different countries have different power connectors, so then we had to like I think at one point Nick was like sawing one of the cable. It was bad. So we it wasn't romantic. It was messy, and there was always a chance for error. And somehow, miraculously, it worked. I mean, that's the thing. At the end of this, it's great engineering. I know. Who led those engineers? I don't even know who it was. So. For a creator, it was I mean, it was like anxiety city because, you know, we're trying to hit this Google I/O deadline. I could not see a damn thing. I couldn't see any footage. I mean, I had no way of knowing. We had to develop like I worked with Rob, one of the engineers, to develop something that would actually quickly stitch some of the camera feeds together, even though they weren't in sync, so I could at least know if the cameras were working, because we don't know. So it was like shipping off drives being like, all right, we only have one shot at this, goodbye. And it was hard, and it was exhausting, and it was so frustrating, but it was the most exhilarating experience of my career, of my life. I think it's the same for the engineers that worked on this too, because we didn't know, and then to have something that we didn't know turn out to be something is kind of remarkable. So you think that that would be it, but you know, the hard part was just beginning. Because I'm a filmmaker. I was a filmmaker. I don't know what I am now. But I was a filmmaker, and so a lot of the ways that I was doing things, a lot of ways I was thinking about content creation generally, was going to actually prevent me from doing the right thing, because it's a completely different medium. VR is just, it's not film. And you know, a lot of the things that I was facing weren't things that were being discussed yet. And so when I tried to go ahead and Google it, there was no result. And if there was a result, it was usually by someone who never made a thing in their lives, and they just had opinions, which still exists. So just to go through the basics of filmmaking, as you know, the frame is everything to a filmmaker. That's what we make. That's what we craft. This is how you tell your story. But your frame doesn't mean a whole lot when you can do, when an audience member can do something like that, right? Who cares what your opinion is? I decided to look there, so now what? So the way stitches are being delivered at the time, and still are, honestly, are like this, which makes it seem like VR is a frame but bigger. And I realized pretty quickly that, my process for editing in a visual medium, in this kind of medium, had to change dramatically because this wasn't working. I was editing in this like kind of frame but bigger mode, and I would look at it, I would watch it back, and I realized that it was just bad. And everyone knew it was bad, and it wasn't working at all. So my engineers, when I was like really freaking out, which was pretty often, and they were like, we're gonna eat lunch. It's like, okay, we'll eat lunch. So we go out to this Thai restaurant, and I'm sitting there, and I'm not eating because I'm stressed, and I look up, and actually you have them too. It's like those speakers up there. So I look up at the speaker, and suddenly it all made sense. Which was the way I was seeing this was not the right way of seeing it. What I should have been seeing was something that was more like this, which is more to say that it's a world of potential frames. That's what every that's what every stitch really represents. It's an experiential world where there's all sorts of infinite possible frames that could exist. And it's a world that doesn't necessarily stay static either. It ebbs and flows, it changes over time. And add to that, an immersive world begs for an audience to be part of that world. And there's agency there, even in something as simple as turning one's head. That's a decision, that's a choice. And so that was a behavior that I ultimately didn't really have control over. I could predict it, but I couldn't completely control it myself. So this in turn made traditional editing wrong, a wrong approach to editing in VR. Because when we think about editing in VR, we think about it as frame to frame. But since we're dealing with worlds now, the process ends up being something that's more like world to world. And these are worlds that extend from one another. And my job as a creator is to essentially pull these users, these audiences, these visitors through the universe I created. So one way you can think about this actually is thinking about points of attention and placing bets in particular areas where someone might be engaged. This is something that I've been calling matching on attention, which is similar to matching on action in editing. So by understanding where attention is placed, we can essentially and more comfortably take a visitor for something she's paying attention to in one world, and then match that to something else that she'd be paying attention to in the next. So we can actually get a better can't even talk. We can get to a place where we can actually be a little bit more sure that the person is going to be seeing what we would hope she would see, or experiencing what we hope she would be experiencing. An example of this is something I did with the Montreal Canadian ice hockey team, because like you do. And this is a scene from a VR experience I did called Go Habs Go. And this is an example of what like a matching on attention technique might look like.
Nuit, non seulement pour leur carrière, mais quel que soit le sujet, de ne pas avoir peur de me contacter. Une fois qu'on devient membre de cette grande équipe, on songe à la Coupe Stanley. Avoir été si près à mes 2 premières années.
So I could have just gone to the rink, right? Okay, I know you're looking at the thing that's on fire. It's a thing that's being passed around, and so I know you're going to probably be engaged in that area, so I'll rotate the second world so that the rink shows up next. But then you would never see that guy. And he's the best part of the whole film, right? And it's basic, it's kind of basic, I call it like the creepy baby market research test, which is like if you have a baby and text, people are going to generally look at the baby, not the text. But if the baby's looking at the text, what the person will aptly do, or a user will aptly do, is look at the baby and then look at what the baby's looking at and then eventually get to the text. So what you end up getting is the dude looking at you, then the dude turns his attention towards the rink and you get the rink anyway. Just to be sure that I wasn't completely like being all weird in my own head, I actually worked with a team called RetNat in Montreal who did a heat map test just to see if this would happen. And turns out, it did. I don't know what that person was doing. Totally like enamored by something over there. And this has actually brought a lot of questions up around like, is it interesting to do viewpoint aware editing? Like, is it interesting to have like general areas of interest be triggers for continuing an edit in a particular way? And the answer is maybe. I think what's interesting is it's fun to actually predict it without those capabilities, just to know that those capabilities could and perhaps should exist. But it's a fun idea, thinking about how you can build a kind of responsive edit to a VR piece based on attention. But I also started thinking about rebellion that was actually inspired by the two guys that created Myst. I went to talk to them in Spokane one time, a couple times, and they were telling me, Robin was telling me that he'd go into a VR experience and look kind of, or pay attention to the direction that he felt people wanted him to look in, and then he would do the complete opposite. And he was like, you'd be shocked, there's like nothing there most times. And it actually happened to me too. I would go in and be like, okay, I'm gonna try that, and you just turn, nothing. Which seems like such a waste, because it's 360 content and all. So I thought, well, okay, well, what can I do as a creator to sort of explore what could be possible in that? So this is a scene from a VR experience I did called Resonance. Kennedy, young girl here, is playing violin. And if that's what you pay attention to in that scene, great. I mean, that's fine. She's there, and that's sort of the point. But what happens if you turn around? Now, you see her parents from the doorway. Those are her actual parents, by the way. I'd argue, if you want to talk about film, this is far more cinematic than the other one, because you still hear Kennedy. She's still playing her violin, but then you can see the parents kind of slightly grimace and then like, yeah. But thinking about how we can use the space in its entirety is something we should think about far more often. The contextual areas of being able to take a point in a scene and be able to re-represent it in many different ways, in various permeations. So by leveraging where, what, and how someone might be engaging with these worlds, you can help comfortably navigate her through the experience you've created, and the universe suddenly has cohesion, even if they're disparate things. And in a way, it's not too far removed from what we've been thinking about in film. It's just not called the same thing. Or it's not the same thing technically. So something like, you're in a world where there's no real point of interest or place to engage, where everything is kind of happening all around you and there's nothing to particularly pay attention to. I mean, that's like a wide shot. It's like establishing shot, where it's really just about setting the scene for something or just getting a sense of space. Something like a scene on a tram in Japan, when there are maybe 2 to 4 possible points of interest, could be seen as a medium shot. Just a way of engaging with a couple of characters or a couple of elements that could be in dialogue with one another. It's the same kind of idea. And a scene like a glacier climber climbing a glacier, who's the only person making a sound, who's the only human in the space, can be seen as a close-up. We pay attention to that person probably the most, for the longest. So really this is about how long we engage and the kind of attention that we give to that world. And it's important to note that not all worlds are the same. Different worlds come with different energies, as we've seen. It's not all one note. And if there's some VR experiences or AR any immersive experiences where this may be what happens, just kind of a one-note thing. And that's okay, but it's kind of boring, and who wants that? But we also don't want our visitors feeling uncomfortable either. So, thinking about physical movement, thinking about fatigue is something that we sometimes forget to consider. So we also don't want someone swinging their heads around, pointing things at stuff, expecting things to happen, unless that's the point, like anxiety, the VR experience, maybe that one, but not this one. So what we really want is good experiential flow. So it's like a dance, it's music, and what that kind of dance is and what that type of music is really what's up to you. That's part of the creative process, right? So this all kind of came out of me through this idea of a speaker in the ceiling and Thai food, I guess, that I didn't eat. But it's interesting to note that like a lot of this we had really great conversations with Adobe, and they actually brought in a lot of this thought into their line to Premiere, actually. So when their first VR toolkit came through, a lot of it came through conversations that we had with them about, things that as a creator I actually cared about when it came to creating work. And I think Adobe Research is working on a NLE for VR, but maybe not right now, maybe not. But it's fun to see how this stuff can permeate. I made a couple of, 3 kind of major VR experiences out of these thought processes. World Tour was the first jump experience that we made. Residence being the second, and the third being Go Hebs Go. But then I started really thinking about cultural impact. So we talked about pipeline changes and how like the ways in which we create with these new emerging tech, how that can kind of shift the ways that current pipelines work and function. But we also have to think about how this actually affects culture and people. So I thought a lot about cultural representation after this as well. And just for a bit of context, this is the Golden Record. It was attached to, how many of you know about the Golden Record? A lot of you. So for those who don't, this is a record that was developed by a small team led by Carl Sagan and Ann Druyan also. And it basically contains human experiences, photos, audio, sound effects, stuff of that sort. This record was attached to Voyagers 1 and 2, which had a mission to head towards the outer planets and into interstellar space, sort of a message in a bottle to the aliens. So during the 40th anniversary of the Golden Record, which was a few years ago, I thought, how cool would it be to reimagine the contents in VR for people? If this is meant to tell aliens what it's like to be on Earth, we're aliens on our own planet. Maybe we need that too. Can we take this content and actually reimagine it in a way that allows for other people to connect with each other? So one of the pieces I made was something called Navajo Nation, which was inspired by a song on the record called the Yebache, or the Navajo Night Chant, as it's called on the record, and this image of Monument Valley. Now, I very quickly realized that there are a few problems here. The first is that the Navajo community I was talking to was generally unaware that the sacred song was on the record. They had no idea. The Yebache is only performed at certain times of the year and in a certain way, so having it floating around in space for all time for the aliens to discover seemed a little weird to them. And the second is that this image is backwards. And like the response was, oh, well, the aliens won't care. I'm like, I'm pretty sure the aliens would care a little bit. They'd start to make assumptions here. And the Navajo really care about directions. Cardinal directions are massive for them. It's part of their spirituality. So like they care at the very least, and we should at least care because they care. So even with the best intentions, we can royally mess things up. So I asked myself, okay, now that I'm here in Monument Valley, having discovered that these things could be actually really bad, I need to figure out how I could potentially help. Can I help? And so the more that I explored Bluff, Utah, which is where I went to do this piece, I observed how much access the community gave to aliens. If it kind of came down to like, how well did they know me, and what kind of access did they give me as a result of that? And this kind of was something I noticed throughout the time I was with them. So I thought, that's actually kind of interesting. Because usually when we make these experiences, we're like, go get it, all of it, free, go. And we don't really think about access being kind of a tiered thing. So what if that was the experience? Like, what if you could and could not do an integral part of a narrative? Like, what if culture could be encoded in the agency that the audience had in the experience? What if that was representative of who they were and who they were and what their culture represented? So when we think about interactivity, most of us think like this. So 2 simple options, right? On or off, open that, push this button, pretty binary stuff. This is Zork, hand-drawn by David Lebling, I think from 1976. We're lame comparatively. If we think door 1 and door 2 is cool, and Zork was doing this in '76, then maybe we can think a little bit better about what we can do here. So thinking along those lines, interactivity and the decisions we make are more important than they appear. Collectively, interactivity has meaning, its own narrative arc, and each decision is marked by culture, experience, upbringing, religion, race, gender. A button push is never just a button push. It isn't. I have been talking to the, unfortunately now next Google Spotlight stories, about how they had an interactive toolkit that they used for all of their animated pieces. And I had brought them this and said, I think that there's a way we can leverage what I feel we need to do with this and what you've been working on. They said, yeah, let's try it with live action, see what happens. And so we looked at what we could do, and I sort of made these 4 kind of micro VR 360 films that centered around Grandma, the Rodeo, Land, and Powwow, which were the 4 kind of major kind of touch points. And then I thought about how accessible they were to someone who was new to the culture. The Rodeo, for example, is a moneymaker for the community, so come on in, give us your money. But Grandma, given her uniqueness and her spiritual nature, her importance, she's much harder to get to. And so what I did was I created a main kind of hub, which was a 360 shot of Monument Valley with each of these vignettes in each of the cardinal directions that corresponded with the importance of those vignettes. So the most important one in the north, the Rodeo, which was in the south, I'm trying to remember what the other one was, Powwow in the west, and Land in the east. And the Hogans and how far away the Hogans were from that center point really determined how easy it was for that person to get there. And all of those, by the way, vignettes ran like 4 trains on a track. So as soon as you started the experience, the stuff would go. And you could go in and out of those experiences to a point, but they would not stop and wait for you. There was no like, oh, okay, we'll wait until you get back. It's like, nope, life moves on. This is how it is. So, I feel like earning your experiences is still something that's kind of interesting, right? And I think it's actually pretty important. And it should be more than a button push that just happens whenever. I think that there's something really interesting about the narrative arc that can exist through interactivity and how interactive components can actually be part of the way that we understand the experience that we're in. So how does like the medium of live action 360 VR be interesting to folks in mass? Asks everybody. And more specifically, how can someone see themselves in this? Like, how can they feel considered? So the second piece I was able to make for the Voyager project was a piece called Beethoven's Fifth. And music was a huge part of the Golden Record, right? It was trying to translate, and other concepts as well that were trying to be translated were like, how do we eat? How do we drink? How do we fall in love? What do those things represent? How do we show them to another life form? So for me, the question was, given the music that existed on this record, what if we could explore what hearing meant to all of us? Like thinking about bringing a perceptual ability and then putting that against something like music. Beethoven particularly, since Beethoven was going deaf as he was writing it. So given Beethoven's creation of music, in spite of his deafness, I felt that it could be important to unpack this idea so that I could build an experience from the ground up with both the act of hearing and deafness in mind. So on one level, Beethoven's Fifth is a great performance of Beethoven's Fifth by the Philharmonia Orchestra in London. On another is Oliver Sacks' notion of movement parsing, how deafness can reshape one's own perceptual abilities and make something like sign language easier to grok. Another layer looks at how the Voyager probes themselves were able to hear on their journey. And finally, Helen Keller, which is an interesting story because I was at MIT, it's gonna make me sound like I'm so scholarly, but I was at MIT at the time, and this guy comes running after me after I do a lecture and screams Helen Keller at me really loudly, which usually you run away from that too. You're like, okay, this nice guy. But he was like, no, she was deaf and blind, and she actually heard Beethoven for the first. She has like a whole letter that she wrote. There's a website called Letters of Note where this was actually recorded, where she had actually written in to a radio station saying that she had heard the difference between brass and strings and the timpani and even different vocal intonations. Like she understood it because she put her hand to the radio and could feel it. So haptics. This interesting notion that haptics could actually be helpful in something like this. So here's a snippet of what that experience was like. The editing of it was also very fun too, because again, I'm beholden to the 360 VR format. I couldn't just like move the rig around, right? So a lot of it was trying to figure out a way of enticing a person to feel like they should step back. So as soon as Tribeca would go like this, we kind of moved back that way. So it felt a bit more like there was some energy or some force being pushed against you, so it didn't feel so weird to be moving around the space. So we explored a lot with that as well. And so we premiered this at the Sheffield Doc Fest, gosh, I can't remember when, a couple years ago. And what was amazing was that there were a lot of people who were deaf that were showing up. And they felt very much that this is the first VR experience that they've done that was made for them. They weren't just the afterthought, they were kind of the point. Like they felt actually considered, which is great. And those who could hear just fine actually came back, and unprovoked, they took off their headphones to experience it again, because they thought they missed something. They were like, oh my gosh, they seem like they had a lot of fun, I want to do this. And you know, it's interesting to think about how we can connect people through perceptual, like, you know, someone who has a perceptual disability and those who are, you know, healthy in that regard, I guess. Having them actually connect through experiences like this, not overtly hitting people over the head like, this is deafness, the experience, right? Like, we're not trying for that here. It's like, how can we create something that's beautiful on all levels, in all permeations? And we owe that to ourselves, to be better about creating experiences that feed more into that vibe. And also thinking about people who are going to be at noisy bars and not have beefy computers and are going to wave their cell phones around and be like, VR, because they exist, and it happens. I've been one of those people. You know, and creating VR is extremely frustrating, right? Or any immersive content is frustrating, and it takes a while. It takes a lot of attention and time. So I gave myself a task, and I said, okay, you have a day. You have to use stuff that's available online, and you can't, like, don't overthink it, just do it. So I created this piece about the Weather Channel, and I'll just show you what it is. I mean, that's basically it. It's for, here, I'll take the. So it's 4 panels of the Weather Channel taken at different points during the 90s. And for some reason, when I did this research, I should put my glasses, my research, it turns out that for some reason, people in Omaha, Nebraska recorded the Weather Channel all the time. So I had, like, you know, 89, 92, 96, 99. You can see kind of the subtleties of changes in the Doppler radar. And I actually really love, I kind of want to go back for a second. Hold on. Weather you can always turn to. It's like waiting for me. It's waiting for me to be there. I don't know why the horse is there, but whatever, it's fine. Now, if you, you know, if you look down, so I called it Conditions at Omaha. So if you look down, you see a postcard from Omaha, Nebraska. And if you look up, you see Kenny G. Is he? Oh my gosh, he's home. He's our gift to the world. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Mine was the band live, so you won. So it's an animated GIF, just like from Giphy, just dragged it on there. It's just him playing forever. And some people would actually engage with it and love it like around them and so on. And some people would just lay down and look up and watch Kenny G perform the whole time. And that was it. And that was fine too. The response, I just like released it into the world. And the response was not what I was expecting. You know, I was still at Google at the time. So Google Filmmaker makes VR video mashup of 90s Weather Channel footage and Kenny G. And I can't think of a reason not to watch this. The Weather Channel to Kenny G is the least necessary VR experience, and we love it. And then Kenny G himself, Seattle native Kenny G, I Spy Someone Saxy playing smooth jazz in VR. For context, in case you wanted to know, Kenny G likes making sax puns, which is really just taking sex and making it sax, and then saying things about himself and the world. So this actually took time. This wasn't just like, oh yeah, VR. He wrote that. It's just like retiring. Not really though. I'm not saying this had anything to do with me, but about a week after that, maybe like 2 weeks, I'll give him 2 weeks, AccuWeather came out with their Weather Channel-ish app for the gear, and the result was very different. AccuWeather's VR app is like dystopian design fiction. Yeah, which makes you think that, you know, we live in a, and I love high fidelity stuff. I still make that stuff. I think it's great. But sometimes you don't need that much to get people to be interested in what you're doing and to be interested in the world. You don't need a bunch of data thrown at you. There's actually a lot of responsibility, and less is more. It still works, you know. It's still actually kind of important. I'm not saying you're getting accurate weather from conditions at Omaha, but you could. You could. You know, you could. And you could have I mean, maybe all it needs is really, you know, Kenny G and a, you know, 90s shag rug for you to just, like, sit on or something. I don't know. But it's really, you know, the idea that something like this could be enjoyed anywhere, and there's really no harm in that. So all of that in the VR world came from this thing. And this came from iteration on an emerging tech, a piece of emerging tech, and just throwing yourself at it, doing iteration after iteration, seeing what didn't work, what did work, and then working off of that. And you get something like Conditions at Omaha, you get something like World Tour, get something like Residents, Go Habs Go, all of them very different, and even something with the Navajo or something in space. Like, there's lots of possibility there, and all sorts of use cases that come from that. Moving on, you with me still? There's a lot. Bose AR. So when I left Google, I started thinking about what I wanted to do with myself and my life, and I thought about kind of how important it was to be reactive to all possible technologies that existed, not just one. And not necessarily from one company, but being able to see and sense the entire ecosystem of all these different technologies that will come into play. So, you know, shockingly found a name that worked. It's not VR AI, it's Vrai. It's French, because, you know, French. And what's great is it does have all the letters in it, but in French it means true or real, depending on how you use it. Believing, of course, that technology is a tool, not the goal, right? And so it was kind of a remarkable thing when one of the first folks to come running at me as soon as I was like, have my own company, was Bose. So Bose was developing technology, audio-driven AR technology, that generally when companies come up to me and say, I've done this thing and it's AR, I'm usually like, great, and then kind of wait to see what happens. And, but they actually had a really great demo of it at South by Southwest one year, and it was like literally just someone saying that the restaurant is over here. Like usually you have your phone up and you're compassing the whole time. And now I heard someone say, over here, and I turned. And it was like, oh my gosh, audio. Like that really does make a difference, a huge difference. And I've always had spatial audio in all my pieces, but this was something else. It was something more profound than that. So looking again at current pipelines, I was like, okay, great. You know what? I kind of want to create an experience that, like, let's take a multi-track recording of an old musician or older musician. Because they did that, you know? Like, what if we took all the different stems, all the different instruments, singers, and so on, and kind of spatialize them and let someone actually move through that music, move through the audio, move through the track. But if I could do that for one thing, I could do that for all things. I could do that with podcasts, I could do that with field recordings, I could do it with documentaries, I could do it with narratives, I could do it with everything. And so there's this interesting thought of like, oh wait, so I can't just do a one-off thing because everyone's been doing bespoke one-off projects. I can actually create a platform from this. This is a platform. So I was like, okay, how do we do this? What do we do? And there was nothing, nothing out there. So I have, you know, it's like you come to that point where, and all of you know this, where you're like, okay, we really want to make this thing, what's out there, and then you're met again with nothing. And you realize that you have to make it yourself. So we ended up creating something called Traverse. And Traverse is a platform for spatial audio experiences that makes listening physical. You can move through the stuff that you hear. It was actually built for the home, not for festivals, not for bespoke conferences. It's actually built to be used at home. So from the ground up, and I have it with me so you can demo it if you want. I mean, it basically just uses an iPhone. I'll come back up, I promise. Goodbye, no. But it basically uses these, like you guys, some of you have them. Like, so the AR technology that's built into those really cool frames that you have is actually going to be built into headphones. And Bose is just the first to do it. A lot of people are going to do it. So thinking about like, okay, finally we have a kind of immersive tech that doesn't look like it's going to eat my face. It's like actually something that I may have to also use for other things, like listening to music regularly or communicating with my parents occasionally. And then also just using your phone as well. So it's like an iPhone. Okay, so people have devices like that. That seems simple enough. So it made sense from a pipeline stance that we had to kind of create that pipeline ourselves. It didn't exist. It should exist. So we had to think about how we would create it. But then again, thinking now as the tech side, being like, okay, what's the cultural impact of this? So it wasn't enough to just take, you know, just getting some bespoke someone to do something. It was like, who do people listen to or know, at least? So we ended up working with Elvis Presley. It's people. Apparently, not apparently, in 1969, it was the first time Elvis Presley was recorded separately from his band. He was on a film, I think. And he, so the recording is Elvis separately and all the different stems, his guitarist, his bassist, his drummer, the backup singers, all of them are recorded separately. So this album was called From Elvis in Memphis. So we took Suspicious Minds and also Power of My Love and created these traverse experiences from them. So it actually looks, so, you know, although it's an audio experience and you're moving through the audio field, the visual on the device, on your phone, is actually representative of where you are in that space. So it's a map, basically. So if you think of what an album cover is to music currently, we think that the evolution of that is a map. Where are you in the space? Each of the colors kind of representing generally where various instrumentation and sound sources might be. But if you press and hold on the screen, another contextual layer shows up. So it's not what comes up by default. It's like the default design, right? Like what's there, what's not there, how does that come up? If you stand on Elvis and hit sing along, the lyrics pop up. No one pressed that button because they thought it meant that we could hear them singing. And we're like, how would we do that? You know, again, you can move around to Ed or any of the other session players. And it feels as if you're moving towards or away from Elvis. What's great is that also some of the session musicians are arguably, for me, better to listen to. So I'll actually go up to Ed, who's the harmonica player, on Power of My Love, and he's just going at it. He's just like, his breath is there, and it's just like, he's just killing it. And you can just hear Elvis from the vantage point of Ed, which is pretty awesome. But you could do this with with anything, really. And the idea was to create it knowing that from a cultural perspective, people are listening to music in a particular way, audio in a particular way, and making sure that we don't forget that just because this new tech is there and available. On another side of that, we did something called the Arm of Insight, which was taking publicly available assets from the Mars InSight lander. So images and audio actually was, I think it was the first instrumentation on Mars to actually collect the sounds of Mars, or it was able to read the sounds of Mars. So we have that in there as well. Horse of a slightly different color. It sort of harkens to like old games that I used to play as a kid. So you'd have kind of a text-based thing in the beginning to give you a sense of who you are, which is the arm of InSight, because the InSight lander can't move. So we had to make you the arm of it. So you move forward, actually, to start the experience. And when you do, sounds appear, sound sources appear, a surface of Mars appear. You can deploy and activate various instrumentation on Mars, which again is modeled after actually what is there, on what the lander actually does. So it's very educational in all sorts of ways. And then halfway through the experience, a dust storm happens, which is, oh, we'll get there, which was conveniently around the same time that Opportunity died. So that was a fun conversation. We're like, and then a dust storm happens. And we're like, NASA was like, wait a minute, maybe not. So what we did was we actually futz with the visuals, so you actually do have to rely more on what you're hearing. Because one of the things we didn't realize were that we're really bad listeners. We actually have gotten kind of sidetracked by the whole visual stuff and stuff on our phones, that we have to teach people how to not necessarily, we don't want to rely on the fact that they will change their behavior, but start to teach them how to behave a little bit differently. So it's that trying to gradually get them to a particular place. I've been talking to this guy for a little bit too. I get lucky in this field because everyone's like, I love immersive, and they don't know what it is. Yo-Yo Ma wanted to know what the stuff was, so I brought everything I could. And this is using a DeepDream headset, and I think he thought it was positional or just assumed he could kneel, so he did that, and I had to tell him he was doing it wrong, which is kind of scary. So we worked with him on a Tribeca Film Festival Traverse experience called Into the Light, which is his performance of Cello Suite No. 2 in D minor that we mapped to a building in New York. So as you ascend to the roof, you actually move through the movements of Bach. And what we did here was we evaluated a space, basically where at Tribeca Film Festival, the immersive experiences happen. We got a sense of kind of the trajectory, like how people are going to be moving, where are they moving to and from, what's around them, what are some places where we could put certain elements or markers or yo-yo and so on. So the markers themselves kind of look like this. They're beautiful. They're essentially QR codes, but they look nice. And from each of these markers, you basically get access to each of the movements. So this is movement 1 in a small little booth that they gave us. Here's movement 3. That would take you up the stairs. Movement 4 and 5. And basically, we had to do a bit of a coordinated dance of sorts because we had to have a guide take them through and basically, guide them through the experience. Because if we left people to their own devices, they probably would have activated one thing and then not known what to do. So understanding, as part of the user experience of this, we had to have someone be there for support was actually quite important. And there was still a map. You still knew where yo-yo was at all times. But we also integrated another element, which was when the markers were activated, the music would happen, but then we had AR visuals around the person that they could either do or not. I mean, they could just see where a yo-yo was, or they could walk through this pretty awesome piece of artwork that I think actually was built in Tilt Brush too, which is pretty neat. And it's spatialized as well, so. You kind of hear it.
I think I spaced out for a little. So the Tilt Brush stuff. This is his movement of the instrument, or
so movement is like the section of the suite. So your movement doesn't release any of the.
So what are these, like the drawing represents?
So those are just drawings that were they were inspired by the movement that was created by another artist.
Oh, I see. It's not correlated to his particular when he plays the piece.
No, it starts. I mean, it rides along when he plays, but it's not responsive to the actual audio, if you know what I mean. Given more time, maybe, that would be cool. It ends up on the roof, which you can see here. The idea of going into the light, meaning you're going through kind of a dark, kind of crowded space and then into a space of peace and serenity. So the idea of like emotionally what the exterior of someone kind of adds to the experience, which is important for AR experiences, I believe. So interest at scale, like how does this actually scale? Well, everyone like smiles when they listen to this stuff. They get it. It's audio. They use headphones and a phone and they get that stuff too. People were taking Instagram shots of their phones, which was interesting. It's just like selfies of the experience. A lot of folks really picked up on it too, saying, you know, it feels like this is something that we've been waiting for a bit. It feels like maybe this could be the killer app. The idea that, you know, it was something that was actually quite powerful as an immersive experience, even without like extensive, like high quality visual components was actually cool. People sang, some of them sang. We won the Future of Experience at South by, which was crazy, given what we were. And the idea that the next frontier for immersive storytelling may be in your headphones. I'm not showing you this to brag, by the way. I mean, it seem like it. I'm saying this because it's a technology that people weren't paying attention to at all. And then suddenly everyone was talking about it because they're like, right, this is actually quite immersive. This actually works for me. And it would work for my mom, and it would work for my kids, and it would work for, and it made sense, and it actually answered a question for many people. So something to also consider is, you know, mass adoption for emerging tech is hard. But if you think about how people do use tech currently, and then again guide them to behaving and thinking about the immersive space in a way that could be interesting, those are your audiences. Those are the audiences that are actually going to buy headsets. It's not, you know, right now those aren't your audiences because they don't even know what this stuff is, what that means. So giving them a sense of the possibility, a taste of it, I think is very important if you want anyone to care. So last but not least, Inception. And this is really a story of two teams. There's a VR team, which was computer vision, and an AI team, also computer vision. And they, VR team was the team I was working with here in Seattle. And you know, we were filming and experimenting with jump. These are some rocks from Iceland that are great. They're great rocks. Rocks are great in VR. Shocking. The AI team, who I knew some of them, a few that were there, they were working on a system. Again, they had reversed it, and they had come up. The system had become DeepDream, and some artists were actually using it in pretty interesting ways. Kyle McDonald did this to video content, and I saw that and was pretty astounded by how good it was. So these two teams sat next to each other in Google Seattle, literally next to each other, right next to each other. Steve, right next to each other. And one day I was working there, and I get another email. They give me the best emails. I got this email that just had this in it, and it was, the subject was, "Isn't this cool?" Question mark. And I was like, "Yeah, you know, it's great. What is it?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's DeepDream. I made it. It's cool." And I was like, "Yeah, okay." So so I see this. So I want to talk about current pipelines. Yeah, you could get this from the system. That's totally fine. But this is the great email one. And then Mike Tyka, who was working on the AI side, was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I see what he's doing. Let me do this instead." So he basically changed parameters, right? Like, so when you're like, okay, this is all DeepDream is, and then you realize you can actually go from puppy slugs to beautiful pagoda mountains. Just by changing some of the parameters, I think that's actually kind of important. From a pipeline perspective, a lot of creators right now are a little worried because they're like, well, if a machine can do that, what's my job? And it's like, well, that's your job. What it actually outputs is your job. That's the artistry. That's the point. So when we saw this, we're like, okay, not as bad, kind of good. And so what ended up happening for the first time ever was these two teams working together to actually bring, you can tell it's jump because of that, but they understood that there was some kind of neat way of leveraging the stuff that we were doing to help explain what they were doing. And so there's really nice friendship that started to emerge. But I couldn't just stop there, so I kind of kept bothering them about, you know, we've shot all this really great stuff using jump, all this fodder that's never going to see the light of day. Why don't we just throw it into the system and see if it works? Which, as a creator asking an engineer to do that, I'm like, it's easy. And the engineer's like, oh my God, you're crazy. Like, it's not easy. Like, there's all sorts of stuff that I have to consider. But we went back and forth on it. I worked with this guy, Doug Fritz, who also worked in Seattle for a spell. Again, Seattle, thank you. So we we worked on this thing called DeepDream VR experiments, which was the first time DeepDream has ever been integrated into the VR space. It was the first time. And we didn't expect anything. We just sort of did it. There was no like, this is a story, or this is because of X, or this is the great conclusion we came to. There was no great conclusion. We just wanted to see what would happen. And here's one of the first tests we did, which is with the waterfall shot. Here's a bunch of eyes. It's kind of crazy. I don't know if those are foxes. This is some of it's kind of bird-like. I'll just let it play because I've been talking for a while. And snakes, some snakes, or worms, snakes on Arecibo. There's one. I've got to wait for this. Not this one. It's the next one. Some people are like, it's like acid, and then the people who took acid are like, it's not like acid at all. And all the eyes that appear. It's pretty great. Anyway, if I were to attribute this to anything that has existed in the past, I guess Edward Muybridge did this with another new piece of technology at the time, which was a camera, and doing fast photography, rapid photography to capture everyday pieces of life. So like a woman jumping over the stool, which happens, and a guy in his underwear throwing a ball, and a man tipping his hat. But what was great was the horse running is a famous example, because at the time no one knew that a horse could run like that. Actually, painters and artists had no idea that all four legs of a horse actually ever left the ground at once. For us, it's like, of course, but back then they had no way to perceptually understand that. And so with this new technology, they finally realized that yes, in fact, all four legs of a horse leave the ground. And so similarly, and just by instinct, we just took what we had and threw it at it to see what we would, what kind of horsey revelation would be revealed to us. I think the biggest one, honestly, was the parameter shifts, like the idea that you can actually change the output and the intent based upon the parameters that you choose. So cultural impact. Thinking about, who decides on these parameters, right? Like what data is being used to train these systems? Whose data is it? Who owns that data? What kind of data? Those questions, right? Like culturally speaking, like what is this representing exactly? And how do we have conversations around that? So I think if anything, we didn't figure this out, but we thought about it at length. Like what is this? What does this actually mean? I also semi-stalked various other teams working in machine learning because I was really fascinated. This include bugging Demis Hassabis back when DeepMind, he hated me. Back when because they were using deep reinforcement learning to train their systems on Atari games, and probably a lot of you know about this, but it was using games like Breakout. This is an example of what it did when it really learned Breakout. Like, what? No, like just crazy stuff. And so I saw this and said, it'd be interesting if, we could think about old films of yore, like, Jerry Mouse and Gene Kelly and their dance sequence together, thinking about, is there a way that we could teach a system how to dance? If it could learn, how to play games like Atari, maybe it could, or Atari games, it could learn this. And so I'm like, can we train this on films? Example of what it is. And they responded, no. It's way too complex. And I was like, well, why? They're like, well, because we can't. This is back then, and now you can do it, it seems. But it's like, then they're like, we can't isolate these two figures. There's like, no way. It's too messy. And I'm like, okay, well, but you can do this with Atari games. Yes. What if I Ataricized the data? And they were like, okay, yeah, that might actually work. So I did. So you kind of get it. You see it. It's like, it's great. And they're like, oh, awesome. That's not in our it's like it's not in our like marketing wheelhouse, so we can't do it. So I mean, I think they were also starting to work on AlphaGo as well. So they were like, we have priorities now. I'm like, oh, okay, well this is fun, you know. So, but stuff like with PoseNet and other stuff that I know you're working on, which is really great to see. I mean, you could do this a lot more efficiently than that. Another thing I was working on was it started getting me going on like 3D face. This is all stuff that I saw earlier today, which makes me feel like I'm so old or something. But it's like there's this toolkit that came out from like creating 3D facial reconstruction from a single image, and then taking a flat image and then reconstructing a face. So again, another gene. But I took this scene.
We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams.
So I took that scene, and it was not the best pipeline or workflow that I could have come up with, but I was, doing it myself. So I basically did like an image. I exported it as an image sequence, and then put it through that system, and then exported that, brought it into Photoshop actually, and it was amazing how it actually reconstructed the other side of his face. So suddenly the thing he was saying to Veruca Salt was something he could be saying to you. So the idea that you could take old films and actually reconstruct them and create immersive experiences, not by recreating the avatars themselves, but actually using the assets that you had through film, was actually interesting. I stopped there, though, because I was like, I don't know if this is what I want to work on for right now. So interest at scale, again, thinking about how do people mass adopt this? And I love this quote by Mario Klingman, which is, there's no AI, just someone else's data. This idea that people are already involved very heavily with the current AI kind of conversation, and they don't really know it yet. So this idea of bringing them on board and having them understand, this is a film, the last film that I did as part of the Creative Lab before VR, which was actually talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep reinforcement learning. We never got to release it because it's 20 minutes long. Again, that's like way too long for Google, but the idea of thinking about what was going on at that time and how one would explore the possibilities of how culture and people and society were being represented through intelligent systems, I think was just really important to think about. How do we translate this for people? Which I guess is a really good and important thing to do as filmmakers as well, is thinking about how do we actually communicate this stuff correctly? How do we leverage other mediums to help explain and perhaps calm the nerves of those who may not understand it very much. In closing, I think this is an important quote to remember. It's something that I hold dear to my heart. When I tried to figure out the ending of a film about machine learning and artificial intelligence, I couldn't find the ending because there's no ending. It's still going on. But there was something Geoffrey Hinton said, which was that the biggest mistake we could make would be to assume that this is how things will be forever. And the crazy thing and the amazing thing about emergent technologies is that they're going to keep happening, and they're going to sometimes keep going, and sometimes they're going to stop. But what's really important is that regardless of that, we never settle on that one thing. And the biggest mistake we could all make is to assume that any technology, whether it's developed here or at Google or somewhere else, will be the standard for a long time. Or forever, I should say. Maybe for a while, but not for forever. And it's our job as creators in the space to be prepared for that and to think about what the next steps could be. So, thank you very much for listening. I'm drinking all my beverages now. Sorry, it's like coffee, water.
So feel free to ask.
Yeah.
You ever take the jump underwater?
No, I didn't. No. We thought about it, but the way that it wouldn't stitch. I haven't said those words in a while. Yeah.
So have you tried think about the visual adventure storytelling, and then like how people will react, or like, oh, is it like game? Like, there's like, have you ever have that questions?
So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of, it's all game design, basically. Like all of it is. So all the user, it's interesting to think about the translation between what's going on in this space and what people are familiar with. So game design being one. User experience design is huge, massive. Like, learning Figma and Yeah, learning Figma has been fun. But the idea of like thinking about, you know, what does the actual user experience look like? How do they feel? Like, how are they moving through space? How long are they moving? Like, all of it is basically that. And I think once I realized that, it was like a big, like, the way I was writing scripts was like the way they wrote Journey, I think, because people were like, whoa, what are you doing? It was like these multi-layers of like narrative arcs. Because you can't do a linear script. It doesn't work, really. So it's like you have to understand, like, this is the user's like interactions. This is what the user may do as the opposite of what you expect them to do. Is that interesting if they do that? Like these are the various like feelings or energies that you'll feel on each level and so on. So, so it is like game design, so it's fine. I don't think it's like porting, you know, Grand Theft Auto into VR. I don't think it's a literal translation, but I do think that I think the biggest difference, right, is that it's happening directly to you. And I think in games, generally, there is still this kind of difference between like there's an avatar that represents you, or you have a controller and you're aware that there's a TV to some extent. Yeah. Oh, was there, what was? You can ask.
So as a producer, my stumbling block would be the post-production. I don't know if you experienced that.
No, yeah, I'm very familiar with the post-production process. Yeah. You mean with which?
With a lot of those like editing and a lot of those like.
So Premiere now has tools in them that make it a little bit easier. You're welcome.
But then also like you start thinking about this like using Unity to like.
Oh yeah, Unity.
Or like interactivity stuff.
I would definitely suggest Unity. Unity we've been using for Traverse as well. I think a lot of it's going to come down to creators. I mean, we're thinking very much about publishing tools and like toolkits that are actually user-friendly tools. They're not out there yet, so a lot of it's game engine based stuff.
Yeah, you start thinking about like, okay, so we are like at the frontier that like, we are actually just keep pushing the scope. Like we basically scope creeping all the time.
Oh yeah, no, I thought as a filmmaker, I'm like, this is great. My hard drive's this big and I have to carry my laptop and that's it. And now I'm like, and this, like back to like the big hard drives and both bulky computers again and the headsets and everything. Yeah, we do. I mean, it's a data thing too, right? We have the file sizes go exponentially grow and then we have to find, you know, hardware that can manage it, so.
Oh, well, I have this content that's sitting in my hard drive and like post-production takes a long time because like I interview people like in a mover and shaker and VAR. I want to put like the data, their company information in the back so you can still hear them talking and you can look back and then look at.
You should look up Metal, METTLE.
I'm a friend of them.
Of Crisp. Okay, cool. Yeah. They have all sorts of workflows and stuff.
I know.
Okay. You don't sound like you like those workflows. We can talk after if you want.
Yeah,
Okay.
that'd be
Cool. I think he was next. Sorry, Steve.
Did you do much with 360 movement with jumps at all?
Yeah, I did a little bit. I did a couple of tests actually. What's interesting, it's something I called flocking. Flocking. It's called flocking. So birds flocking. And so the idea of like if you move with a group of people, it's actually quite. It creates the cockpit effect. So as long as you have like a group around you and you're moving at the same velocity, it's actually not bad. If someone's moving towards you and you're moving away from them, it's okay, but you need to make sure like on all sides that it's accounted for. So a north, south, east, and west person moving at that speed with you. If you're moving with the flock and then the flock keeps moving and you're stuck, it feels really sad. Because you're like, where are they going? And if you're standing there and they move towards you and then you move together as a group, it actually feels great. The thing that feels bad is like someone moving around the rig as you're moving, like the kind of, you know, sickness-inducing kind of movement in that regard. So if you're like at odds with any of the actual movement around you, then it's actually very uncomfortable.
Did any of the rules, like traditional rules like the 180 rule, kind of carry over, or is that?
It sort of felt a bit more like, that's more of like a comfort level thing for me. So like actually having a conversation that was not like this, but like this, if that makes sense. So having it less, like not like on either, like you didn't have to go like this the whole time. You had something that felt a little bit more this. So I think it was just a matter, I think that's kind of the closest thing I could think of. I think there's another 180 kind of parallel too with movement, but I can't remember it right now. But I know from that like a dialogue scene or something, it was kind of keeping it tighter within a hemisphere than doing it this way.
Have you tried volumetric video, and like what's sort of like the current pipeline and cultural impact on that?
So volumetric is interesting because there are a lot of different various people working on it. So Facebook has a camera that they're working on that I've not seen, which I think with Red, I think they're working on. But there's also Scatter, which is great. Those guys like James George and his team. So Depth Kit has been a really interesting place to play, especially because it has like a pretty, they're really great in terms of support, and they're there for handholding. And from an aesthetic standpoint, it can be something that's super abstract to something that's very realistic looking. I've worked with a couple of capture stages. You know, it's interesting because I like the lower, I like the like not so like realistic stuff, just because I feel more for it. I can't really. I mean, I can. Personally, I feel like, I don't know if anyone knows Ken Perlin's like the Walker's experiment, where it's like you take a trapezoid, the trapezoid's moving, but you give it like a mocap data from a human, and suddenly like the trapezoid actually looks like someone who's just kind of trudging along with a little tiny one that's kind of trudging with it. So I feel like there's something really interesting about like representation not necessarily being high fidelity, at least visually speaking. But yeah, I'm also interested in like kind of how do you create avatars within a space that are generated based on data as opposed to like based on like what we believe that person should look like. So like kind of figuring out the machine learning aspect and ways of bringing a lot of that stuff in. But yeah, I mean, I think what becomes more of an issue is like, how do you entice someone to be able to move through a space? Because even for traverse, it's like people tend to stand there and they don't do anything. You can't like push them every time, like move, you know? So it's, a lot of it has to do with like coming up with some sort of journey through the experience that requires them to move in order for it to start, and then they start to understand that they can walk and move within the space and interact with it. So all that stuff still applies to that space.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, what were the headphones that as you were talking about Traverse?
Oh yeah, so it's QC35s. The
QT35?
QC. Yeah, and they're the 2s. But you have to check to make sure that you have, like I would buy them on the store online, the Bose store, just because you can't guarantee that they're going to have Bose AR capabilities if you buy them in a store, because they're still getting rid of like old stock, and like they don't know the difference between the AR ones and the non-AR ones.
So these are Bose?
Bose, yeah.
Okay. And related to that,
yeah.
I'm just curious, since you have these spatialized audio that you're working with,
Sure.
I'm just curious how you think about using spatialized audio when you want to direct attention within an environment, or what role that plays?
Yeah, I mean, we try to not, I mean, with the Arm of Insight one, it was easy because it was like, find and deploy X, and then you have to go and find that thing and then deploy it. So it was more like, do this than that, more instructional. With the Elvis experience, it's like, just go experience it. I think we definitely had an intro where we have someone actually walk towards one of the session players that are playing by themselves, and that actually starts the experience. So it's like you actually learn. It also is good because otherwise we calibrate, I'm moving here, we're calibrating to like you in the center of a space, which is fine, except if you have a space where you actually want someone to go on a journey from point A to point B that's longer than that. So we actually have you start the experience by orienting you this way. So we have you find Reggie, and you stand on Reggie, and then the thing actually starts. And then you walk towards Elvis, which is in the center. So you can actually start to coordinate that. It's sort of like looking at what the user experience needs to be, and then leveraging elements that you already have to also teach them what they're going to have to do in the experience as well, if that makes sense. So kind of combining with that. Yeah, it's fun. It's just, it's all a whole user experience problem. Yeah.
Going off of that, like how often do you have like outside like fresh eyes on projects to test it? Just because like, you know, you're working on it a lot, you get kind of this thing, you know what's going to happen next. Like,
right.
How often do you do that and get people like realize this stuff?
Yeah, I mean that's why festivals are interesting. I used to feel like festivals, you know, as a filmmaker, you're like, oh, a festival is a great place for me to like show my final thing, and then you're like, in VR, AR, immersive stuff, like there's no final thing. You know, you're kind of still working on it a little bit, and films to an extent too. But I think for us, the greatest amount of user testing is by throwing it's on the App Store now. Like you can get it, and people have been. But then we can do experiences at these festivals, and you get a bunch of different users coming through. Enthusiasts, people within the industry, people who have never done this stuff before. Like South by was actually a great touch point for that reason. Because otherwise you have to be able to put in a place where people are and can do this. And working with the Elvis folks too, you know, Elvis Week is fast approaching. So we've got some interesting places to experiment with it and see what happens.
I think we'll have to end now. So thanks a lot.